Welcome back to the future of. This is the space for those curious about the future. My name is Andrea Fonte, and I'm going to tell you about the technologies, the strokes of genius, and the discontinuities that could become big and shape the way we'll live tomorrow. In this episode, Signals of the Future, Food for Thought, News that Leave You Stunned. 1. Neural bypass in macaques. Connecting a wireless monkey to a PC, but also using non-invasive sensors to stimulate brain and muscles to work even in paralyzed people. Different strategies between science and sensationalistic tweets. 2. Lowboom supersonic jets. An American startup is working on the prototype of the new Air Force One, thinking supersonic and Lowboom. Again, lots of hype, a real utility, but the timing is still biblical, and how come a fledgling company is dealing with it? 3. The birth of DCash. The new digital currency of a group of Caribbean islands debuts. Interesting, but it's worth understanding how it differs from cryptocurrencies, because it's different from them, even if at the base there is always the blockchain. 4. Akasaki LEDs. He leaves us a phenomenal character, a Nobel Prize winner, who invented one of the most impactful objects for the future of humanity, the blue LEDs. And he tells us a story of resilience, which is a life lesson for every innovator. 5. Deep nostalgia. A software that animates in short videos, old photos of loved ones, probably disappeared, makes us think about a future of zero digital trust, but in the meantime collects over 70 million users in a few weeks. Are you ready? Then hold on tight, buckle up, ready to go.
Silence, please.
Neural bypass and macaques. This week yet another tweet from Elon Musk updated us on Neuralink, one of the companies in his galaxy, implanting a chip into a macaque named Pager, allowing him to play Pong, using only his mind through a wireless connection. Do you remember Pong? Come on, it's the famous game where two bars act as a racket and a giant pixel as a ball. The official press release reads, "Today we are pleased to reveal the link's ability to enable a macaque monkey, named Pager, to move a cursor on a computer screen with neural activity using a fully implanted neural recording and data transmission device with 1024 electrodes, called the N1 link. We implanted the link in the hand and arm areas of the motor cortex, a part of the brain involved in planning and executing movements." According to the South African-born entrepreneur, the first Neuralink product will allow someone with paralysis to use a smartphone with their mind, faster than someone using their thumbs. Nice, but not beautiful. The goal is noble, no doubt. In the United States alone live over 5 million people who have some kind of paralysis, but while Neuralink is playing with monkeys, someone is definitely ahead of the game. A team of U.S. researchers, in order to make a more practical and affordable system, developed a completely non-invasive device called GlidePath. They recruited volunteers who have spinal cord injuries, but still have some mobility in their shoulders. They placed a proprietary mix of inertial and biometric sensors on the volunteers' arms, and asked them to imagine reaching for different objects. Data from the sensors were fed into a machine learning algorithm that allowed them to infer the volunteers' grasping intentions. Flexible electrodes on their forearms then stimulated the muscles in a particular sequence. In one session, a volunteer used this wearable bypass to pick up a granola bar from a table and bring it to his or her mouth and take a bite. The results were published in the journal Bioelectronic Medicine, with no tweets and no buzz. It all originates from a beautiful experiment done in 2015, where a brain implant created by the same team had allowed a paralyzed person to play Guitar Hero, albeit with a simplified guitar interface adapted for the purpose. His movements did not depend on the damaged spinal cord inside his body, but on a technology, known as neural bypass, useful for turning intentions into actions. The amount of data collected by the electrodes was incredible. Each of the 96 electrodes measured activity 30,000 times per second. In this ocean of data, scientists were able to identify discrete signals that meant flex your thumb or extend your index finger, and so on. Science, not science fiction. In fact, to be fair, a combination of artificial intelligence and weeks of very hard training for the volunteer. Today, with non-invasive systems placed on the arm and not in the brain, a new era opens. To speed up the process of calibrating stimulation patterns, researchers are now building a database of patterns that map hand movements, with the help of both able-bodied and paralyzed volunteers. While each person responds differently to stimulation, there are enough similarities to train a system from which everyone will benefit. Downstream of the movements, solutions will also need to be found to make people feel the texture of the objects they touch again. Something that specifically concerns fingers, their movements, and sensory aspects. If bringing food to the mouth has become feasible, making people perceive the consistency, temperature, and other tactile characteristics of an object is still a frontier. And it's not trivial. Without this aspect, for example, you would not even be able to fasten the button on your shirt, a very common gesture for us, but not for the sick, of course. Maybe one day Neuralink and the team from the Institute of Bioelectronic Medicine in Manhasset, New York, will decide to collaborate, because science is beautiful, but if it progresses as a group, and even without too many drum rolls, it probably goes even faster.
Lowboom supersonic jets. Since September 2020, there has been talk of new projects around the world's most famous aircraft, Air Force One, the one on which the President of the United States usually travels. It was the Pentagon itself that tweeted, yes, you heard me right, tweeting, that it wanted to develop a low-noise, executive transport supersonic aircraft that will allow key decision makers and teams to travel around the world in half the time it takes now. We were still in the Trumpian era, where the president's moods passed through Twitter, but in any case the idea of replacing the current Boeing 747-200B, an aircraft already extensively modified from the one used for commercial purposes, was already in the air. After all, drastically increasing the speed could radically change the nature of presidential travel and make international travel much easier and faster. And so, almost out of nowhere, a startup, Akasaki, came up with the idea of creating such an aircraft. The logic is right. The future of global rapid passenger transport could be low-boom supersonic flight. So-called low-boom allows travelers to fly at supersonic speeds without generating disruptive noise for those on the ground. This goal, traveling at the expected speed of 2,222 kilometers per hour, is not trivial, but it would allow the aircraft to use new routes, even flying over land and populated areas. When an immobile object, such as a stereo, produces sound, its sound waves spread in all directions. If they were visible to the naked eye, these waves would be similar to what you see when a stone is dropped into a pond, with small waves spreading out in concentric circles. When an airplane becomes supersonic, it moves forward from the sound it produces. This causes its sound waves to form behind the airplane in a cone shape, similar to the waves trailing behind a boat. The ripples of the rock, to continue the analogy, but three-dimensional in space, instead of flat on the water. An approaching supersonic airplane is inaudible, but as it passes the observer is hit by a sudden sound, similar to a concentrated sound wave boom that is annoying and also dangerous. In some cases, these booms can cause damage to buildings, and supersonic military jets flying over land have even been able to break glass and windows. That's why Akasaki wants to work on new aircraft that have shapes and volumes designed specifically to solve this problem. But where does Akasaki come from? Founded in June 2019, it received a $150,000 seed round from Y Combinator. Okay, we're talking about one of the largest American startup accelerator, but the amount is clearly little to build a supersonic jet. Not even a year later, they got a $1 million small business innovation research contract from the United States Air Force to prototype the aircraft to be used as Air Force One. So we're still talking about investing for a prototype of an aircraft that Akasaki says will need to be certified in 2029, and be operational by the mid-2030s. And then there's also the question of range. Akasaki's supersonic jet will be able to fly about 10,000 miles before refueling. That will get it comfortably from Washington to Seattle, for example, but not to Tokyo or the Middle East. The aircraft under study would have a capacity of 31 passengers, so certainly luxurious and super technological, but perhaps a bit small for the president. The functions of presidential aircraft vary depending on the needs, but this aircraft could be used primarily as Air Force Two, that is, if anything, the one that carries the Vice President of the United States, and not the President, with his large staff and tail of journalists in tow. What also strikes me is the fact that the U.S. relied on a startup for this project. To revive a presidential version of an aircraft with performance comparable, if not superior to Concorde, is a beautiful project, but making flying machines is not a joke, and it is no coincidence that the market is now concentrated around a few experienced manufacturers. You need a lot of money and important human expertise. You might argue that with enough money you can do anything, but the fact that investors will choose to invest in this hardware-based technology, while the American venture capital world seems largely focused on software, also surprises me a bit. Far be it from me to be skeptical about a startup project. That's the field I live and work in, but this one seems really complex. So a big good luck to Akasaki, because what they are facing is a really ambitious challenge.
The birth of DCash. The Eastern Caribbean has created its own form of digital currency to help speed up transactions and serve people without bank accounts. The Central Bank of the Eastern Caribbean has created its DCash, meaning it is the first blockchain-based currency introduced by one of the world's monetary unions, although some individual nations have already adopted similar solutions. DCash became available as of last Wednesday in 4 island nations as part of a one-year pilot program: St. Lucia, Grenada, Antigua and Barbuda, and St. Kitts and Nevis. And after the initial wow, if we enter more into the details of the project, we understand that anyway there is some limitation compared to the decentralized and free use of cryptocurrencies on the blockchain in its purest and original form, also because we are talking about two different things. DCash was created by Barbados-based fintech company Bit in collaboration with the central bank. Unlike cryptocurrencies, it is issued by an official central bank and has a fixed value tied to the existing Eastern Caribbean dollar, which is largely used in the region. So it is not created by mining, and in fact, it does not even make sense to call it a cryptocurrency, although the reference to the blockchain obviously can be misleading. The system allows users even without bank accounts, but with a smartphone, to use a downloaded app and make payments via a QR code. Those without bank accounts will have to go to an authorized agent or non-bank financial institution that will have to verify the person's information and then approve a DCash wallet. That person, in order to feed the account, then will have to go to a supermarket or other store and give the cashier physical money, which will then be deposited as currency in the digital wallet. Instead, for those who already have a bank account, in fact all they have to do is make a wire transfer. Also, there are limits on the amount of money people can send through DCash, and there are no plans for now to integrate credit cards or other services into the tool. Now I think the theme is clear. We are talking about digital currency issued by a central bank, the value of which is pegged to a traditional currency, and to get the digital wallet, you have to get recognized and authorized. Then to get the digital currency, you have to deposit money in cash, and then finally you can spend it. In short, little remains of the original spirit and functions of cryptocurrencies, and even if transactions are recorded on blockchain, we are talking about something else, namely digital currencies. And in fact, the real goal of the project is to facilitate a 50% reduction in the use of physical cash by 2025, and provide an additional means of payment to people who do not have a bank account. And on the islands, among farmers, fishermen, single mothers and small artisans, the list of potential users seems reasonably long. If we then add that digital money is harder to steal than physical money, and that it certainly increases the speed of transactions compared to, say, a check, we certainly have a full picture of the potential usefulness of the tool. On the other hand, when it's said that the solution is less expensive, I beg to differ. A central bank, along with a fintech, launch a digital currency which requires an infrastructure to function, and no one but consumers and merchants gain from it. My doubts remain. If you go to Eastern Caribbean Central Bank's website, when asked, are there any fees to use DCash, the answer is no, there are no fees to use DCash during the pilot period. Note during the pilot period. We'll see. The project comes just over 2 months after the European Central Bank, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, the Swedish Riksbank and the Swiss National Bank created a group to study whether it makes sense to issue digital currencies and how. But most are skeptical that such projects should be initiated by central banks or joint ventures of private operators who must always make a profit downstream. In the meantime, I would gladly go to the Caribbean to sunbathe and stay under a palm tree to drink a cocktail, but for now I am still indifferent as to how I should pay for it.
The LED of Akasaki. The Future of is a podcast that talks about the future, but for once I have to tell you a story that comes from the past, because it has some aspects that I found very beautiful and very human. In the past few days, a gentleman named Isamu Akasaki passed away at the age of 92 in Japan. I'm pretty sure most of us have never heard of him before, and yet if you've been able to click the podcast icon on your smartphone, or are reading the text of this story on the website, you owe it in part to him. Akasaki won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2014, many years after the great invention he worked on and then perfected, LEDs. In fact, specifically blue light LEDs. If Edison's incandescent bulbs illuminated the last century, Akasaki's LEDs will illuminate the current century. Red and green diodes had been around for a long time, but inventing a blue LED was the holy grail, because to recreate white sunlight, all three colors had to be added together. The blue LED was the most difficult to produce because of its high photon energy and the human eye's poor sensitivity to low wavelengths, but once realized, it gave birth to the next generation of chips, where the colors are controlled by special software and can replicate any color. The result? Televisions, monitors, smartphones, flashlights, car headlights, infrared remote controls, the list of applications has become very long. But it's not just a technological victory, LEDs are an additional weapon against global warming and poverty. LED lamps last tens of thousands of hours, and use only a fraction of the energy of the incandescent bulb. You can understand the implications of a technology that lasts longer and costs less, knowing that lighting alone accounts for about a quarter of the planet's energy consumption. Now, if you're thinking that this gentleman has only put the final piece that completes the puzzle, there's more. The events surrounding Akasaki's discovery, along with partners Amano and Nakamura, who won the Nobel Prize together, are studded with remarkable facts. First of all, the fact that it took 30 years. Many companies and scientists were trying, but the three were the first to get there. A marathon of a lifetime. Emblematic is the case of Nakamura, who worked at night on LEDs with blue light, because his company, the Nikkei Corporation, was against his research. And when it came time to patent the innovation, the company got away with paying him just $200. In Japan, it was not customary for companies to make agreements with their engineers to share ownership and profits from inventions, but Nikkei, many years later in 2005, would learn the hard way that being unappreciative costs money. A court would force her to pay Nakamura many millions of dollars in damages. More than $200. But Akasaki's own words are also symbolic. When we announced important results for the time at an international conference in 1981, there was no reaction. None at all. I felt alone in the desert. But I was determined not to abandon this research, even though I was alone. A fine example for all, the story of these three men, who at various points along their journey were opposed, underpaid and ignored. But they helped achieve something that truly has potential spin-offs for all of humanity. Bravo Akasaki, something tells me that in your eternal darkness, somewhere an LED will light up.
Deep nostalgia. Last month, a graphics tool was launched, where an artificial intelligence is able to briefly, but incredibly realistically, animate old photos. Giving life to the face of a missing relative or an old photo of your mother when she was young has become immediate and affordable for everyone. Just upload your photo and the software takes care of everything in seconds. I went to try it out and honestly, I have to say that it is amazing. Of course, if you look closely at the images, some blurring near the ears and in the contours is still perceived. But if you don't want to do the hair and counter hair, seeing a face that comes alive, rotates slightly, winks, smiles, or throws a kiss is a unique experience. If that face is that of a loved one, the tool can create, even if only a few seconds, a remarkable emotional connection. Users simply upload a photograph through the MyHeritage website, where it is first analyzed and then enhanced not only to ensure the quality of the final animation, but also to make it easier for the deep learning algorithm, created by a company called DID, to do its job. The orientation of the person in the photo is analyzed to determine the direction in which their head and eyes are looking, and then a corresponding video driver, a modern recording of a face making movements as if it were posing for a photo, is selected to drive the animation of the photo. Yes, because in fact, behind the animation, there is a movement pre-recorded by actors. The algorithm chooses the most suitable for the position of the head in the photo, and then mounts them together. Only clearly you will not see the actor move, but the face of your loved one. In recent days, 10 new movement options have been added that might be particularly tear-jerking for some users, as they include emotionally strong movements and expressions like kisses, a sympathetic look, smiles, and even a nod of approval. In the first 5 weeks since launch, the site has animated the beauty of nearly 75 million images, a record number that indicates how quickly the game is becoming popular. And DID's technology promises to add speech as well, making the interaction even more amazing in the future. Even in the MyHeritage application, this feature is excluded, probably to prevent the tool from turning into the low-cost frontier of deepfake creation. In short, for now it is carving out a space in the niche of personal, intimate use, but in fact the technology is already there, and the potential risks therefore exist. In fact, reactions to deep nostalgia have been mixed. This future that brings back to life the past, for some is a fascinating tool, for others a risk to be taken with a grain of salt, for others just a technological attempt to challenge time, and maybe even death. Without forgetting that, for obvious reasons, none of the faces that users have tested have obviously given consent. While their faces, and your data as subscribers, enter the database of the company. A company that was born to do DNA tests and reconstruct entire family trees and that, in 2018, suffered a hack, a data breach involving the data of 92 million users. I, for this reason, decided not to test deep nostalgia with personal photos, but with vintage images taken from the web. Still, the temptation to use the image of a loved one is strong. And I think that, if for me having known that person, it would be easy to appreciate the differences with the ways of the real individual I met. On the contrary, if it were any stranger, fooling me would be much easier. And so we go more and more towards this world of digital zero trust, where we no longer trust anything that appears to us on a screen. Something that will divide the world into two polarized categories, the digitally gullible who will buy into everything, and the chronic skeptics, who will reject anything that isn't said in front of them by a live person. And recognizing the truth, which has never been easy already, will become even more difficult.
Thanks for listening to the future of, really. You could have listened to the radio, you could have spun a vinyl, you could have put on a cassette, you could have used a stereo 8 to know what it was, but instead you preferred the future of. That's what I thank you for, and you still have hundreds of episodes left to discover. Sentence of the week. Robert Goddard wrote, "It is hard to say what is impossible, for yesterday's dream is today's hope and tomorrow's reality."